Hello and welcome to the Civils Times. Today we'll discuss the editorials of 13th February 2019. These are the articles we'll be covering, starting with the Hindu, the shape of job crisis. Now this article, what is the context to this article? Recently, NSSO had conducted a survey for the period, for a particular period, but that data had not been released. Now, a leaked report had said that the unemployment had touched a 45-year high of 6.1%, which had remained over the past 4 decades to around 2 to 2.6%. Now, this had touched a very high of 6.1%. Now, the government, which is the Niti Aayog chairman, said that the data that has been leaked is not finalized. 6th-quarter data is awaited. Moreover, the government says that it's a draft report, not yet verified, and final report shall be released in March. Now, job concerns. There had been speculation that the growth path which is being followed in India is basically one of jobless growth, meaning there is growth. However, along with this growth, more jobs are not being created, which is resulting in increased unemployment. And this leaked report has confirmed the speculations of the opponents in particular. Now, job concerns are at odds with the GDP growth numbers. This has also been said by the government. No significant rise in productivity means high growth has to yield more jobs, which Niti Aayog has stated. Now, this is the context. Basically, you got the idea. The context क्या है? Ki NSSO basically used to conduct a survey, which was your quinquennial. Quinquennial meaning NSSO used to conduct surveys every 5 years. The previous one was conducted in 2010-11, and the new one had to be conducted in 2015-16. However, following the dictum of the Arvind Panagriya panel, this had said that this quinquennial report had to be stopped and the frequency over which the surveys are being conducted has to be increased. And this panel had said that instead of having the survey conducted over every 5 years, rather the surveys should be conducted every quarter. And we shall read the rest of the portion in the article itself. Now, job creation has slowed since 2011 and 12, the year of the last published national sample survey office labor force survey. Now, this expert, he's saying the author, he has used Labor Bureau annual survey of 2015-16 and Center for Monitoring Indian Economy Private Limited data, which we had discussed yesterday. Now, this Center for Monitoring Indian Economy is a private entity that has conducted household surveys. And household surveys are the most comprehensive surveys with respect to employment data. Now, we'll cover in some other lecture what are the sources of employment data. Note, we shall also be releasing lectures for the burning issues. We shall soon be coming up once our technical team is entirely set up. Now, which has a sample size larger than the NSSO labor force surveys. Now, both these surveys cover rural and urban as well as organized and unorganized sector employment. In other words, they capture both the EPFO as well as the National Pension Scheme. Now, note, the employment data can be carried out in a few manners. One is the payroll data, which is based on which is based on EPFO, which is Employment Provident Fund Organization data, or the National Pension Scheme data. This is based upon payroll. The other is your household surveys, and there are many other methods which are used for conducting the employment surveys. As well as such employment might be generated by Mudra. Now, the latter two job sources, see, what the author is saying, that he has used the Labor Bureau annual survey as well as the private survey conducted by the private entity CMIE. Now, these surveys cover both the rural and urban, organized and unorganized sector. That is, they capture the EPFO as well as the NPS, which is your payroll data. Remember this, payroll data, they capture the survey which is being used by the author, as well as it captures that employment that might have been generated by Mudra units, Mudra loans, or platform economy jobs. Now, these two job sources, one is your payroll plus your those generated by Mudra loans. Now, these were being cited by the government that such data, the data on the employment in these sectors or these methods is not captured by the employment data which had been being released or which had been talked about in the news, and therefore these job sources were inaccurate. This was what the government was saying. The author is countering this claim of the government and saying that the surveys he has used will capture both these data as well. The latter two job sources are precisely what the government claims were not being captured by the data available. We have repeatedly stated that the government claims on absence of good data on jobs are simply untenable. Now, what the lead NSSO 2017, see, we have highlighted the important points of this article in blue. This is sky blue. These are the important points which inform the crux of the paragraphs they are in. So, what the leaked NSSO 2017-18 data has shown is that open unemployment rate, which does not measure disguised unemployment, and informal poor quality jobs that abound in the economy by the usual status, never went over 2.6%, has now jumped to 6.6%. Basically, this paragraph is saying that open unemployed rate has jumped to 6.1% in 2017-18, whereas between 1977 to 2012, this has always remained to around 2.6%. And this is a tremendous increase from 2.6%. This increase in the unemployment data is a tremendous increase. Further, in the same period, in the last 10 to 12 years, more young people have become educated. Now, you provide certain data, you can make notes of the data, however, that shall not be more important. What you have to understand is the basic underlying concept in this. In the past 10 to 12 years, more young people have become educated. The expectation of such youth is for an urban, regular job in the industry or services and not in agriculture. And if they were financially well off, then they can also afford to remain unemployed. Poor people who are also more poorly educated have a much lower capacity to withstand open unemployment, and hence they have lower open unemployment rates. Further, now this, see, open unemployment rate, which does not measure disguised unemployment and informal poor quality. Disguised unemployment. What is the meaning of disguised unemployment? Disguised unemployment basically means, suppose you have the agricultural sector and you have an agricultural land holding, suppose. On that land holding, you need people of, suppose you need 5 people to cultivate that land holding. However, due to unavailability of jobs, suppose instead of 5, 8 people are working. Therefore, the extra three who are working on the same land holding instead of the 5 which were needed will be said to be disguisedly unemployed because they were not necessary for the unemployment. This is what is disguised unemployment. So, open employment does not measure disguised unemployment. However, even this rate has risen to 6.1%. That is the meaning of the author. Moreover, what the leaked data also shows is that as the open unemployment rates have increased, more and more people got disheartened and fell out of the labor force. That is, they basically stopped looking for employment. Further, this shows the growing numbers of youth who are neets. What is neets? Not in education, employment or training. Not in education, employment or training. These are needs. Now you can remember this. And these needs are a potential source of both a demographic dividend as well as demographic disaster. Meanwhile, the government economists have repeatedly told us that there is no such job crisis. Now here's certain data that you can go through. Across the education, there is a sharp increase in the unemployment rate of the educated. Moreover, while the NSSO shows that share of regular wage jobs has been rising in the urban areas and the share of employed and casual work rate falling, this rise has been nowhere close to the number of educated youth. That is, there has been a rise in the share of regular wage jobs This is true. This is what the data has shown. However, this rise is much less as compared to the rise in the number of educated youth. This has risen much more sharply as compared to your regular wage jobs. For an economy at India's stage of development, an increase of workers in agriculture is a structural retrogression. Now, this is a term, you should remember such terms which you can mention in your examination. Therefore, you should remember such terms for your mains, which is your structural regression. Now, what is the structural regression? Structural regression is basically returning back to an increase of agricultural workforce, as we have discussed before. That is, what has happened is at this stage of India's economy, whereas the number of manufacturing jobs or the services jobs should be increasing, rather what we are observing at this stage of India's economy is that there is a return to agriculture due to lack of jobs in the above sector, and this has been termed as a structural regression. Structural retrogression. Now again, the author has made a comparison of the terms between 2004-5 to 2011-12, where the number of workers in agriculture had fell sharply. However, similarly, the number of youth employed in agriculture fell from 86.8 million to 60.9. However, by 2015-16, this had again risen to 84.8 million. Therefore, there was a retrogression where we had observed an increase in the number of people who were employed in agriculture sector. Now, there has been a drop in manufacturing jobs. The number of jobs in manufacturing has fallen down in absolute terms. Now, this is consistent with the slowing growth in the index of industrial production, which consists of manufacturing, mining, and electricity. This is certain data that has been provided, and this holds for both private as well as public investment. Now, what is tragic is that the growing number of educated youth between 15 to 29 years who are becoming NEET. What is NEET? They are neither in education, nor in employment, nor in training. Now, this number, 70 million, has increased by 2 million per annum between 2004-5 to 2011-12. Whereas the same has risen by around 5 million per annum between 2011-12 to 15-16. That is a 32 million increase in needs in our society over 2011-12 to 17-18, which is a potential lump and fodder. These youths together constitute the potential labor force which can be utilized to realize the demographic dividend in India. Now, the author makes a comparison of India and China, which are both the most populous countries on the earth. By 2040, our demographic dividend, which comes but once in a lifetime of a nation, shall be over. China has managed to reduce poverty sharply by designing an employment strategy aligned to its industrial strategy. That is why it rode the wave of its demographic dividend. Unfortunately, India has neither an industrial policy nor an employment strategy, let alone the two being aligned. I hope this article is clear for you. Moving on, now we move on to the next article, a case for common sense. Now, what is the context of this article? The context of this article is the 14th meeting of the Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt in last November. A key question on the top of the agenda was how to govern biological resources at different levels for the world's sustainable future. Now, we should understand what the CBD is basically. Now, we all know what is biodiversity. The global awakening, the treaties that emerged from 1992 Rio Summit followed several major environmental agreements and spawned a series of subsequent accords. Now, this slide shall be very important from the perspective of your static knowledge on environment. See, in 1972, this is the first time ever a conference had taken upon sustainable development, which was called the United Nations Conference on Human Environment in Stockholm. This was the first major international meeting devoted to environmental problems. In 1987, the Montreal Protocol, Montreal is in Canada, the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer requires nations to eliminate chemicals that harm the stratospheric ozone. Now, in 1992, the first summit, the Earth Summit, was conducted, which was known as 1992 Rio Summit, because this was held in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Now, out of this, now in 1992, following the Rio Summit, 3 agreements had been reached, which were the fruit of the summit. First is your UNFCCC. This is your United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Next was your United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. We shall discuss only your CBD, which is the context of this article. This was your third agreement that came out. This was an agreement on convention to conserve biological diversity. In 2000, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety was signed, which regulates the transport of GMOs, which are your genetically modified organisms. In 2002, the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity set a goal to halt the decline in biodiversity by 2010. 2010, the Aichi targets set specific goals for reducing threats to biodiversity. In 2012, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems is launched to provide scientific input to CBD. Now, what is CBD basically? The main assignment of CBD is to reduce the rate of biodiversity loss. There are other assignments: develop biodiversity targets. Nations have only just started to establish focused targets for biodiversity. These are national targets. Protect ecosystems, share the gene windfall. The Nagoya Protocol on sharing of commercial benefits derived from the collection and use of genetic material has been signed by 92 countries but is not yet enforced. Recognize the indigenous rights over the resources that are arising from these indigenous people. That is, the benefits that arise out of the use of these indigenous resources should be distributed with the indigenous people to whom these resources belong as well. Provide funding and regulate genetically modified organisms, for which we have the Cartagena Protocol. Now, getting back to the article, what is the author saying? The author is saying that the use of commons, see, the entire crux of this article revolves around commons. What are commons? Commons are natural resources which are open to humanity, and these are not reserved for some community or some nation. These are open to humanity, such as air, earth, soil, forests, etc., over which every community or every country, the entire humanity can lay claim to, and not just some single community. However, with the growing civilization came the urge of those with money and power to privatize these resources for individual prosperity in the form of property management principles, intellectual rights, etc. Now, CBD has given the states the right to rights on the use and management of these common resources. Now, the author states certain facts. Why commons? According to estimates, a third of the global population depends upon the commons for their survival. 65% of the global land area is under commons, and at least 15 to 25% of its total geographical area for India comes under commons. The common pooled resources contribute about 5 billion a year to the incomes of poor Indian households. Around 77% of India's livestock is kept in grazing bays on extensive systems dependent on common pooled resources. 53% of India's milk and 74% of its meat requirements are met from livestock kept in excess. These are data which you can note down for your mains, because always a mains answer will be beautified if you provide certain data to back up your claims in the answer rather than merely stating your claims, because just stating the claims will become sort of a layman answer. Adding data to it makes it more beautiful. Now, what is the issue? What is the concern basically? The concern is that there has been a decline and degradation of these commons, which holds such significance as we have discussed before. There has been 31 to 55% decline over the next 50 years. This is speculated, which has jeopardized soil, moisture, nutrient, biomass, biodiversity, food, fodder, water, etc. Moreover, India's annual cost of environmental degradation is equivalent to around 5.7% of the GDP. This has been stated by the World Bank itself. Here, as of 2013, India's annual cost of environmental degradation has been estimated to be about 3.75 trillion per year, which is approximately 5% of the GDP. Further, commons are becoming uncommon is a major sociological, socio-political, economic and environmental problem. While the state can have its oversight, keeping people away from using and managing commons is against the effective governance of commons. The sovereign rights provided for legally under the CBD must not be misunderstood by the state as a handle to do away with the commons-based approach to managing biodiversity. That is basically the author is saying that the locals or the indigenous people who have rights, indigenous rights over these commons, should be made a stakeholder or participant in the management as well as formulation of policies for these commons rather than merely the government doing it. Another key concern is the changing socio-political impact of migration. Gone are the days when the commons are resources relevant only for rural. Commons are now a major provider of livelihood opportunities for both the urban as well as peri-urban. Peri-urban being those which are basically transitional areas between the rural and the urban areas. Now, the approaches for future. First of all, there should be a review of the current governance of biodiversity and natural resources. In addition to seeking more money, time and capacities to deal with biodiversity and natural resource management, we need to focus on three specific approaches. First is to reintroduce more strongly the management and governance principles of commons, approaches into decision making and implementation of conservation. Two is to use the Joseph Schumpeter's approach of creative destruction. Creative destruction basically meaning any new and efficient technology which basically comes into the market, disrupts the entire market and makes the previous technology that had been dominating the market obsolete. That is a new and efficient technology rendering the older technology obsolete. An example would be your Android phones that have basically replaced or destroyed the entire market of your Nokia phones which used to come earlier, which were your basically basic phones. Now these phones are rarely found anywhere and have been completely replaced by Androids, which are much more handy to use and they provide much more features and tools for at very low price. The third would be to relook at the Elinor Ostrom's Nobel Prize winning principles of dealing with the commons. I would request you to kindly go to Wikipedia or Google and just study briefly what is this Elinor Ostrom's Nobel Prize winning principle of dealing with the commons. The third article The third article is basically dealing with the Iranian Revolution. Now you can go through these articles. The main crux of this article would be discussing both the articles. The crux of the articles are that these articles have been written in the context of the month of February being the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. The pro-Western monarchy in Iran, which was headed by the monarch Shah Reza Pahlavi. Let me just find his name here. The Western-backed monarchy, which was governing Iran by Muhammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, was overthrown in 1979 by what is known as the Islamic Revolution of Iran. Now the main thing that the author wants to drive here is that Iran, despite having numerous international pressures, has survived the 4 decades following this Islamic Revolution. Now, this Islamic Revolution had led to an isolation, basically, a serious isolation in Western Asia. Then several wars were inflicted. One was the 8-year-long Iraq-Iran war. Numerous economic sanctions have been followed by US plus its allies, which have rendered its economy too weak and too hardening for these citizens, and which has even forced Iran to pursuing its nuclear aspirations. Despite all these, Iran has weathered these difficult times and stood on its path of the revolution. Now, here the author points that there are two aspects of this. One is their pride over the Persian nationalism, their ability to preserve the Persian character and language despite their acceptance of Islam, which is a religion of Arab origin. And these are Persians. Iran is the erstwhile Persia. You must be knowing about Persia. You have a game, Prince of Persia, and there were numerous Persian. If you have seen the 300 movie, you have the Greeks versus Greeks, which was led by Gerard Butler, and you have the opponents as the Persians, who were very, very powerful once upon a time, and even to late 1800s, they were very, very powerful. So this pride over their Persian history is one reason for their strength or tenacity, and plus the distinctive character of Persian Islam embodied in the Shia doctrines that distinguishes it from the predominantly Sunni neighbors. You can read this article yourself. It is a pretty straightforward article. The next is the deadly brew. Now this article pertains to your mixed alcohol or the illegal alcohol, toxic alcohol that had been consumed by people in UP and Bihar. Toxic alcohol consumed in UP and Uttarakhand, which has led to death of over 100 people. Now this points to your poor governance, corruption, etc., etc. Availing alcohol at cheap prices poses a huge risk to the lives of the people. And now the author says the toxic alcohol poisoning in India has occurred before. There was the Malwani Hooch tragedy in Mumbai in 2015 that had killed around 106 people. Now this is attributed to the lack of affordable liquor for the poor. High taxes and excise raise the prices. Cheap brewers are peddled by criminal organizations, often in collusion with the enforcement personnel. In UP, many communities have been protesting the sale of cheap liquor in pouches, which are freely distributed even among the social events. An enlightened policy is needed to strike a balance, curbing illicit flows with zero tolerance, discouraging consumption through social campaigns, and reviewing the levies on less harmful beverages would be certain policy measures that can be taken to reduce the occurrence of such incidences. Further, at the moment, it is essential to make an example of those who participated. In parallel, it is vital that the capacities of the health system be upgraded to handle the victims of toxic alcohol. Toxicity often comes with drinking methanol. This is important from the point of prelims, which results in blindness, tissue damage, or death. Timely treatment through hemodialysis, infusion of sodium bicarbonate, and ethyl alcohol can save lives of these people. Now, there was no article on Indian Express. See, we'll be discussing the articles of Indian Express only if these articles are way different or point to a certain different issue or provide a very different viewpoint from your Hindu. We shall keep Hindu as your main source for preparation for UPSC. We shall also soon release a factoid through which we'll be covering your monthly current affairs from the perspective of prelims. We shall be out with these soon as possible, and the number of video lectures on our website is bound to grow to a large extent. Now, as far as this video lecture is concerned, that's all for today. Thank you and have a very